Eccoci ragazzi, ben ritrovati in questo nuovo episodio di Performance Talks. Oggi è Andrea, abbiamo l'onore di avere qua con noi Joel Smith. Welcome in our podcast, Joel.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's a pleasure and an honor for us to have you in our podcast. So let's start. Can you please make an introduction about yourself so our listener will know better who you are and your story, please?
Sure. So yeah, I have probably a different background, at least a little different. I've been interested in sports performance since I was young as you can imagine, like 10 years old, doing wall sits to try to jump higher. Like what 10-year-old does that? But funny thing is, full circle, I'm 37 and I'm coming back and now I'm doing the same thing, kind of like studying the long isometric hold. So 27 years later, revisiting. But sometimes, and I think like the intuition of a young person, a person who's never heard anything else about training, it's interesting to see what they come up with. So yeah, I went to college for sports performance. I was at a point in grad school where it's like you can be a strength coach or coach track. You kind of have to pick. I wanted to do both, and they told me you have to do one or the other. And so I spent my intern hours shadowing or just coaching track. I was a coach on the college track program at the place I did grad school, and coached track for basically the first 6 years of my career. I was a track and field coach first, also certified in strength and conditioning. So doing the strength and conditioning. Age 27, I started the website Just Fly Sports, which is now a podcast. And then that led me to kind of boost my career rapidly with a job at UC Berkeley, which was an NCAA Division I. So I jumped Division III to Division I. And a lot of coaching, as we were talking a little bit before the show too, it's like there's this network that you really have to, that helps you climb the ladder. And I was like someone who just somehow was outside of that. Like I took the back door in. And got a great job. And so I transitioned from track coach basically to full-time strength coach, being able to work with basically just club track periodically. So I kind of flipped my script there, but it was good for me. The strength and conditioning element was really crucial to my full development as a track coach. I think it was a little more self-centered, very concerned with just the number one performances of my best athletes to help me get a better job and look good as a coach. And then in strength and conditioning, it's different. It is more of a service. It became my goal towards the end of my time to make sure you're saying everyone's name, from the best athlete to the athlete who's achieving the least, that you try to treat everyone the same. And because it's you're not, as a strength coach, you're not there like the one who's getting the glory, you're the one who's behind the scenes. And that was really important for me. And yeah, I mentioned I started Just Fly Sports. And so that whole venture, I'm 37 now. So 10 years later, that's now my full-time job. I stepped away from my job at Cal, and I work a little bit of multiple things, volunteered at high school track, work out of a local gym. So I train athletes in the private sector now, and do a bunch of online training, writing books and products and stuff like that. So that's been, hopefully I didn't take too long. I think that was the less than 5-minute version of a somewhat long span of time.
That was perfect, sir. Because we have to always say that we are fun first, and then we got the chance to have you on our podcast. So it's really a pleasure. We all the time try to look up at you and your work and the work you did on your website and your podcast, because it's so much high level and always make you think. So I guess we always like to be challenging our thinking process. So it's something that we believe is quite crucial in our job, and quite interesting in the fact that you must have somehow an open mind to change what you believe is good and what you believe maybe is wrong, and then try to replicate as much and see what happens with your athletes. Because at the end of the day, when you change the people you're working with, you never know. So moving on to the second question at this point, I guess, or even our public know that you are quite involved with plyometrics and jumping. Therefore, I would like to ask you the second question is in regards of plyometrics, especially, in plyometrics is a wide word, and you can get in tons of different exercises, tons of different variations. And so as you said, you got like a background in track and field, so which I guess in some areas the main focus is to running faster, because we work in like field sports, so our aim is in that regard. Would you like to say something about the horizontal and vertical ratio of like plyometrics exercises?
Yeah.
I did
So-
a super long introduction, sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. So for team sport athletes, as opposed to track and field, I would say vertical is generally more the way to go. I think that, and even we might talk about this later in the show, but like horizontal, like a bounding, it has some transfer to running, but at some point, and it's might be earlier than people think, it actually doesn't transfer to running anymore. I found a lot of ways to take bounding and make it more elastic, and to what you get athletes to think of when bounding, like not trying to like lift your knee necessarily. Like you tell athletes to bound and lift your knee, it actually can create a whole different motor pattern and could be counterproductive to running fast, which a lot of people wouldn't think about that. I think a lot of athletes just do it and survive and just do the right pattern when they actually run. But for most athletes, we're going to do more vertical, more drops and depth jump type activities and those types of things. So, and I'll stick, I think Bush Nextator, I was on a panel with him and Rob Pacey a while back, and he had said something like a ratio of 3-to-1 for a team sport athlete. So for every 3 depth jumps or hurdle hops, you're doing maybe a bound contact or something like that. So I would say I'm pretty close to that ratio.
Okay, cool. But in regards of the, would you say there is even like some sort of motor loading component differences between like the vertical and the horizontal? Because maybe the vertical you can progress a little bit easier somehow, and maybe the horizontal got like, I'll say this example. I got like 14 years old kids in rugby, and when I try to do some sort of bounding or forward jump or whatever, their landing is kind of, I don't know if I'm taking some sort of risk but I'll do it anyway. I don't know if maybe it's a good thing to do or not. So is there more, let's say a more learning, easier way to develop the vertical rather than the horizontal, or is it's just fine? What's your opinion on it?
Sure. So I think that, yeah, coaches should be familiar with kind of the progressions from base to finish, and not just the progressions, because I think it's very easy to say, well, just give me exercises. And that's, I think the industry as a whole, it probably differs a little bit by regions of the world. But I know in the United States, and in my experience and watching like what interns were looking for, or a lot of questions I get asked, people want a relatively simple answer. And I find a lot of what we should teach athletes is really simple movements, and just teach them to feel the movements better, versus like a bound, like I kind of alluded to a bound. It's like, oh, well, you should be in this position at the end of it. Well, that could screw everything up. So for vertical plyometrics, really it's all what's happening at the ankle. And so starting with, and I think a lot of times too, we take for granted just how complex sport movement is, and just how we might say an athlete's bad at a plyometric. We might say they're terrible at bounding. Well, you could go watch them play rugby or football, and you're going to see a lot of really complex and intricate movement that by far, the complexity by far exceeds this bounding exercise you're having them do. And then you have to ask, well, why am I putting this exercise in there if everything they're doing on the field is so much more complex and fast and explosive? And so ultimately it comes to selecting a simple movement and a simple progression, and then having them feel and understand why they're doing it. And so in the vertical realm, it's as simple as like, let's just say a pogo, let's just say ankle hops. Let's start there. And I think that a lot of coaches, they escalate things way too fast. It's just about progression. It's not about, let's spend a lot of time in this really basic movement and make sure it's really good. And so just hopping up and down on 2 legs. Let's start with that. Things I look for, and I look for being able, plyometrics is elastic. I'm actually making an online course all about this stuff. But it's almost about how little muscle can you use in this movement. When I look at plyometrics, that and not using too much muscle is almost hand in hand. If we look at like a deer or a gazelle, an animal, we don't think muscling movements. It's like these powerful little snaps, and it's using the structure of the body and the tendons and the muscles to unleash the power that the athlete has. Like my mentor in movement, Darian Barr, talks about the series of quick isometrics, like every movement. And so when we look at plyometrics from the level of the foot, which is where it all starts, the foot is 3 domes. So it's a dome in the front, the transverse arch. I'm making motions with my hand if this is video. So I just think I look at the foot from the front. Is there a dome in the front, or are the toes really flat? Is there an arch to the side of the foot? Now, flat feet aren't terrible as long as there's like athletes who are naturally flat-footed but still have a transverse arch. Like that's okay. That's actually almost the most explosive foot. And then is there a lateral arch? So do I have those engaged? Does an athlete know how to feel the arches of their feet? Do they know can they feel anything? Do they know anything that's going on with their feet? And so what I usually will do if we're doing just hopping in place, a lot of times I'll have an athlete learn like, are you toe gripping? Are you gripping your toes? Because if you're gripping your toes too hard, you can't feel the arches of your feet will not work as well. So I will a lot of times have an athlete just completely lift their toes off the ground, and they're only standing on their heel and the ball of the big toe and the ball of the little toe. Basically, they're feeling the tripod. You took the toes out of the equation. Now hop up and down, like just a few 5-10 centimeters off the ground. And what you'll see a lot of times is when an athlete is doing hopping drills, as soon as the toes come up, there's less knee bend. It inherently gets more rapid and more elastic. The return gets a little bit quicker. And so having athletes learn to feel their feet, learn to feel how much knee bend you're utilizing. What's your torso doing? What are your hips doing? Holding your hands on your hips and noticing, are they just cranked in anterior tilt the whole time? Do you have control of your hips? Or can you feel, what are your knees doing? And I think you had this question about knee valgus, but do you notice that your knees are doing this intricate little dance of in to out, under control, not out of control, but in control? So just doing simple hopping like that, and you can take that hopping then forward, like the rudiment series. So just think a series of small 6 to 18-inch, or I got to use metrics, sorry for the backwards American system, but like 15 to 45 centimeter forward hops. And with all that, it's got to be small. The reason why those hops should start small is because if they're too big, it's really easy to use too much muscle. Meaning you're going to watch an athlete treat that series of hops a lot of times as if it's a series of calf raises, if that makes sense. And we can see those athletes a lot because their gastrocs, their soleus, the calf muscles and back are really developed, and they have nothing in the front, the tibialis and all that balance. And we talk about muscle balance. So this group should be this strong and this group should be this strong. Well, the cure isn't just to do a bunch of tibialis raises. It's to teach an athlete to hop and bound with a foot that's kind of locked almost, that can act as a spring versus doing it where you're pushing actively with your calves. Does that make sense? Any questions or thoughts with that before I keep going? Because I'm there's not a visual or video, so I don't want to get in the weeds too far. So I'll say this then. But if you watch an athlete do sport, you're going to watch them do everything elastically. They're not going to muscle it in sport because their mind is fixated on the game, and then their subconscious brain will take over and do things pretty well, hopefully. Now, not everyone is truly elastic and doing well, but a lot of times when you do plyometrics and hops and you're like just letting an athlete think about what they're doing, so a lot of times they're going to put more muscle into it than they should. And so teaching athletes to load, like I was working with an athlete today who's doing just that. Now, he's an American football lineman, so he doesn't need to be, the king of bounding, but he's also probably been lifting weights way too much in the sense of pushing 1 rep maxes too hard over the years. And so he's lost a lot of elastic ability. And we're trying to improve his vertical jump too, just for like combine kind of purposes and those kind of things. But he's like that. Everything is just calf, calf, calf. He can't lock his foot and work elastically. And that hurts you on the line because then those little quick jabs and movements of the feet are not going to have that stiffness to them. So with him, I was the cue or the idea, I don't like to say cue, the idea we were communicating was pull your toes up. And I don't care about the up. I want you to feel to pull yourself down. Like you're just pulling the rubber band back and then letting it snap. You're not trying to snap it. Once you pull that slingshot back and let your fingers go, you can't push the rock faster or whatever you're shooting. It has to. So really, it's just teaching athletes how to load, and just awareness of the feet, awareness of loading, and then from that standpoint, you can then escalate. You can do whatever. And then I will say too, as you escalate, I do like the idea of silent plyos. So if it's in the vertical realm or horizontal, it doesn't matter, but vertical especially, if you're at least fairly silent on the plyometrics, that generally at least means that your foot probably has somewhat of a dome going on. Because if it doesn't, if you have a totally flat foot with no arches, it's going to slap right down. The heels will slap right down. So just by virtue of plyometrics being quiet and silent, that should at least help the athlete to self-organize a strategy to become more elastic. And you can take that as you go. So that's just, I'll just leave it there at the starting point. If you want to ask how that applies to other hurdle hops, and to me, it's all kind of the same, or just a drop. The vertical, it's almost all more about absorbing force and being strong than I think it actually is specific to jumping, in the sense that, and you asked me the question later here, a two-leg running jump is really a one-leg jump, because the only thing that's actually converting truly is that last foot that comes down. Everything else is just trying to prevent you from losing speed. And so at the end of the day, that last leg does need to be stiff and strong, but there's a lot of other components that go into this too. Like, you could have the stiffest, strongest plant stop leg in the world, and if you screw up the rest of the approach, then you're still not going to jump as high. And then horizontal plyos, I'll do the same kind of deal with bounding. So I like to start with, like, I would just call it single leg. We'll just say single leg mini bounding. Like, this is the base, is stand on one leg and do just hops. And most people they judge it based off how far, how big. But the problem is with bounding is you need to learn to feel the timing. You need to learn to feel when you give force into the ground and when it gives back to you. And when the ground gives back to you, then you go. Versus people who bound and they're just trying to chase a position. They're trying to chase a knee position. And when you do that, if you're feeling for your feet, you're going to miss your feet. What I mean by that is you miss that moment when the ground is giving back to you and your body locks up the joints that it needs, so the Achilles tendon acts like a big slingshot. And I'll feel it if I'm going too fast. For example, I was doing in the gym, I was doing like a 5-meter run up and 3 bounds fast and far off my left leg, and then I walked back and did a 5-meter run up, 3 bounds fast and far off my right. And my left leg was okay. I could catch the ground wave, but my right leg, I wasn't catching it. It just wasn't ready for that magnitude. And so this isn't a simple answer. This can be a difficult thing, because this means you have to go and you have to practice it yourself. You have to feel this yourself. And that was something that frustrated me in seeing a lot of interns that I worked and kind of learned from me back at Cal particularly. But like, it seemed like it was a lot. There was like a lot of people just into general fitness. So like weightlifting, I like conditioning, I like getting a sweat and, that kind of thing. But it's like if you're going to work with athletes, at least in that realm, like this is the base stuff you should feel yourself. And so to communicate this to athletes, I think it's something you have to take time, just like silent plyos or just hopping on one leg. When does the ground give back? When did I lose my feet? Like bounding, you can do this by just make the bounds progressively farther and farther and farther. Start with maybe bounding 1.5 meters each bound. It's nothing, Next, did you have your feet? Could you feel when the ground gave back and that you rode the timing out? Now try 2-meter bounds. Did you still have your feet? Did you feel the sense when the ground gave back to you? Now try 2.5 meters. Did you still have it? What was the point that it dropped out? At that point where it drops out, in my opinion, you're no longer training your body well. And I was a recipient of this through my years, I think, because I stopped playing team sports a lot. I was a track high jumper, triple jumper. And I jumped 2 meters 14 when I was 21. And then I just did a ton of weightlifting, and my Olympic lifts went up and everything went up throughout my 20s. And I was about the same, but I really didn't get any better. I had more probably horsepower, but I wasn't as elastic. I wasn't actually as fast, I don't think, either. And I think the way I did plyometrics a lot was just about pure distance, just pure magnitude. Everything was about magnitude, how far, how high. And what I neglected, and this is what, when you play sports, you get this automatically a little bit, is that, the little quick timing, where the body is, as soon as you're in a sport, all that timing's there. It's all automatic. As soon as you go to plyometrics, just because we get caught up in how far and how we can lose the timing. And so I just think that's a nuance that coaches should always have in their pocket. To take it back, though, to vertical, the simplest thing you could possibly do is just an altitude drop off a box, and can an athlete absorb it?
Yeah.
And can they be silent? And can they have a shin angle and a torso angle that are about the same when you land versus like a torso that's way over or knees way forward? That's the easiest way to not screw up a motor pattern. Then you have depth jumps and whatnot, which is great. But so without saying too, I know I just talked a lot on that, but at the end of the day, it's about small movements done really well with awareness. And then you build those out, because again, sport is so complex. Athletes do so much in sport that's amazing without us, I think, really seeing exactly what they do. So yeah, we just need to not overcoach and really appreciate the basics.
So I have a question, Joel. But do you progress when? Do you trust your athletes? So when an athlete, for example, says, "Yes, I have awareness about my ankle, about my position," so you decide to progress, or you have some feedback that you have to have?
Yeah, so that would be two things. One is letting so you're just presenting a spectrum. And I like the idea of giving athletes choice and giving them a spectrum and basically saying, look, you can go as far as you can. Like, we're going to do bounds, and we'll say we do 4 rounds of 20 meters. And I just tell them, look, every round you can go further. And it's up to you how far you want to go. And if you feel like you're losing your feet, just stop, and you're going to leave it up to them a little bit. So that would be an option there. And then the second thing is just being able to observe too. You observe over time. And as you watch those athletes start to go further and further, you're going to start to see the people who are just becoming disconnected. And when you're disconnected too, the compensation is actually more knee drive. Because if you think about it, if your foot mushes and squishes, and now you're spending more time on the ground, but you still have to cover distance. How do you do that? Well, think about it. As the foot is mushing and the shin is rolling forward, what's happening on the other side of the body? The knee is driving. And so you're actually going to have a situation where you could have a really big knee drive. And so that could be an example. Watch the foot mush down and watch a really big knee drive. Or what you notice happen is you notice the athlete just adopt a very pure pushing strategy, where they might not have the foot hit very far in front. It's almost hitting right underneath or almost out the back. And it's just calf push, calf push, calf push. And if you're doing that, you might as well just do a heavy sled sprint. That's going to help you way more than doing calf push bounding. I've seen like football linemen, for example, doing American football, who are bigger individuals, doing like single leg bounding or single leg hops. And I'm watching how they're doing these things. I'm like, you guys should just be sprinting with heavy sleds, because that's so much more of a pure motion than what you got. I'm sure it's not hurting them. And that's the thing is what I'm talking about here is really, this is like years of just being a nitpicker and looking at people do things suboptimally and just say, how can I make this more optimal? And and a lot of athletes too will do your plyometrics, and you watch them play and they just forget everything they did and they just play. And you see it in track all the time too. You see athletes doing like their A skips and all their sprint warm-ups with high knees, and then they go run and they forget it all. Like as soon as the gun goes off, it's instinct, and they're going to do what they're going to need to do to win the race. And that's another discussion, but a lot of like the A skips and the high knees, although nice for some general strength development, actually have very little to do with actual sprinting. So a lot of athletes will survive it. But at the end of the day, this advice, I feel like, is for the athlete who's the overthinker. They think too much, and they've maybe overlifted too. They don't have that elastic core of what they do. And so I feel like that's a way to get it back and just hopefully maintain it.
Okay. Yes, it's a difficult topic, because you never know where exactly, if you have like, let's say, for example, 15 athletes in one session, it's kind of weird. It's kind of difficult to determine which one is completely using the foot rather than just muscle it out, if it does make sense in English. And it's difficult to make them realize the importance of like being, as you said, elastic and not sloppy, and try to get out from that situation, like with muscles, as I said, or like with the power, etc. But it's kind of different. It's difficult, and I guess for what just you said, it's crucial to make them realize that as a strength conditioning coach, probably we have to give them this tool they got in the box, and then when they do the actual sport, the sport event, we hope that they try to pick it up and use it a little bit more. But as you said, like when you see the actual sport performance, they completely forget and just do the job, and they don't think about the fact that, oh, my foot must be on that level or whatever, etc. But I guess it's our job to make them realize that they have to do that stuff.
Yeah, I think if you put it in front of them and just give them enough repetitions, it's just creating the environment and letting them learn as they'll learn. And some of the best athletes, I mean, some of the best athletes are almost like the ones who are uncoachable in the fact that I've seen this in swimming and track, like they don't want to learn anything. They just want to go and compete, and they find a way to get it done somehow. But Alex Fuzz Khan, he's up in the UK, high jump coach there, had both of his training DVDs back in the day. And someone took them. I wish I still had them. I don't think they produce them anymore. It's like Best of British Athletics. And all his drills would work short to big. So what he would do is, like, you're going to do like little toe dribbles and then take it into a sprint, little teeny straight leg bounds and then make them bigger. Like, and I just think is it going to be perfect? No. But like, is it going to give the athletes a great opportunity to notice what happens as small elastic movements start to get magnitude behind them? Yes. And it's like, this is anything that lets the athlete experience and teach themselves. To me, that's it. Like, you just give it to them enough and they're going to start figuring stuff out as they go along. And some you'll get the bell curve. Some people will not be very responsive. And I feel like those people wouldn't have figured it out anyways, to be honest. And then you're going to get people who really respond well. So, and then hopefully in the middle, you get people who at least get it and they appreciate it and they understand what it feels like.
Yeah, we hope so. At least we'll try to.
So I think we can move on the other question, but I think you already answered it. So my question is, talking about athletes and athletic performance, it is better for an athlete to be elastic or to be more muscular?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if you would have asked me this back in 2014, I think, when my first book came out, I would have had a different answer for you. Okay. And that answer would have been almost that the elastic and muscular is interchangeable. Like, you can be one or the other. But I've taken it now in the work of Bill Hartman, a physical therapist here in the States. He looks at athletes either from the archetypes of a wide infrasternal angle or a narrow. So if you look at the angle that your ribs, so you have your sternum, and then at the bottom of your sternum, you have the xiphoid process, and the rib angles are coming off of that. And when an athlete is in a normal breath presentation, so you're not like, you haven't inhaled fully, you haven't exhaled fully, you're just kind of resting. This is, as I understand it, at least, is that angle narrow or is it wide? And I want to say it's, if it's over 120 degrees, that's wide. If it's under 90, it's narrow. I'm not sure where the middle ground goes, but you can see it pretty well in the sense that if you look at your athletes and look at the ones that are the good squatters, have the good standing vertical jumps, those oftentimes are going to be the wides, and the ones who tend to be the more reactive jumpers, the better deadlifters, those tend to be the narrows. And so it's because I thought for a while, it's like, well, why would someone be more of a force athlete than elastic? Like, just based off, I don't know, muscle type. Like, before I used to think it was maybe muscle type, like fast twitch fiber distribution, or some sort of odd personal preference, I guess, based off your youth and what you did. And those things can certainly all factor in. I think the biggest thing that youth actually plays in is your elastic system in your feet. Like, did you go barefoot enough? Did you get enough sensation on your feet? Those types of things. If you don't have that, you're going to be less elastic by nature. But I've heard it said that athletes either like to bend their knees a lot, or they like to play with pretty straight legs, like they don't really bend much. And so based off of that, and that type doesn't change. So that will not change. I'm a narrow personally, and I will never be a wide. So therefore, I will always be a better deadlifter than squatter. I will always do better when I don't bend my legs very much, when I jump and run and those types of things for the most part. And someone and I also personally can handle less heavy weightlifting without my shape changing, meaning dumping into more anterior tilt, becoming more compressed anterior to posterior, those things. Elastic athletes with narrow infrasternal angles are at more risk from a lot of barbell loading from a perspective of just being elastically connected, because once you're in anterior pelvic tilt, that kind of can reduce some elastic mechanisms. Like triple jump, it does for sure, bounding. But I think even being able to utilize the hamstrings and posterior chain, those types of things, it can impact rotation. So you want to be careful with narrows. Every time I've personally done a powerlifting program of any sort, my vertical and my speed are just terrible, like horrible, worse than the average person who would do that kind of thing. Whereas other people can do that stuff and be fine. Like the wide infrasternal angle, that person who's born to squat can squat more. They can handle more heavy compressive loading because that's kind of what they've meant to do. So a lot of it I've kind of reverted to, are you a wide or are you a narrow? And I was so biased being a narrow ISA elastic over the years that I felt like all the athletes I trained should train like me, which means more speed lifting, less, lifting over 85% 1 rep max, all that stuff. But if you're wide, you can tolerate more of it. And so I think it's just important to understand that for both archetypes that you come across.
But the main difference is in the regards of like the actual structure of the bone itself, like it's just the structure of it, or is like the way the fascia changes due to the structural. But there is like I'm missing this connection between the fact that you got like a more wide base or like more straight base. So this thing, could you give me a little bit more explanation, please?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because just saying the angle doesn't do it justice. And I'll say too, I'll try to explain this the best I can. I probably had about 4 podcasts that I've done with people who have been down this rabbit hole, and they got less confusing every time. So I'll also say this based off, I'm still not an expert at this stuff, so I can give you the general rundown. But basically, you have imagine you have a soccer ball in your rib cage. Like that's your pressure. You're also the guts, like the intestines and all the viscera. They weigh like 40 pounds, and so that's bouncing up and down inside you. And so the way that an athlete can modulate that like bouncing ball with the pelvic floor and the ribs actually is going to have an impact on their movement strategy. So in a nutshell, you have a bouncing soccer ball inside your ribs that's going to dictate how you prefer to lift and move and do various athletic movements. So I am a narrow. So what that means is basically you could say that my pressure works best when I'm a little bit straighter legged. If I drop down, I'm also really good at yielding all the way down in the bottom of a squat, but where a narrow struggles to really get that pressure going is in that midpoint of a squat. So we all think about that person who really buries a squat deep. They get up just above parallel and they just get stuck and they can't do it. That's not really, I mean, it is a muscle issue, but it's also a pressure issue, meaning that sticking point when they need the pressure to be the strongest, they weren't able to achieve that because of the pressurization factor. So basically people who are narrow at that like squat, really tough point, just cannot get the pressure that a wide can. So that's why they are not going to really prefer to be in those positions as readily in sport. Although their benefit is they can drop into like a deep squat really well. They just aren't like super strong there. So they tend to do better with the pressurization more at a straighter leg type setup. So that's like a deadlift. They might be a good deadlifter because the deadlift, your legs are almost straight already for the most part compared to a squat. And so their pressure is good to go at that point. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So a wide is like the way I look at it, at least this is the vision I get in my head. And I might be butchering this a little bit from a pure what's going on, but the general idea I think is correct is that I almost look at the wide as like they're ready to like just compress. They're ready to let that pressure ball compress when they get to those critical positions in a deeper squat. And they tend to be your physically stronger athletes. If you look at like Olympic weightlifters, you can tell who's a wide and a narrow. Angus Bradley, who I've had on my show, he's trainer from Australia, will say, you can look at Olympic lifter, like the quad dominant Olympic lifter is the one who doesn't like go to the hamstrings right away in Olympic pull is most certainly a wide. And what you hear out of Olympic lifting circles is if you don't have quads, you can't get quads outside of being like a track cyclist or something. I don't know. But like just through the sport, you won't get quads. But the reason is not the quads. The reason is the pressure management strategies. If I'm a narrow, I'm just going to straighten my legs a lot more. And I'm just not going to go to my quads, so they're not going to grow. So it just depends on who you are there. So Yeah, hopefully that.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. So basically, like anatomical differentiation dictate the fact that an athlete, a person in general, is more capable of, let's say, handle more pressure, intra-abdominal pressure. Therefore, is way more. Let's say it relies his performance more on the, let's say, the squat partner or the inch partner, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just they can put the pressure in at that. They have the gift of being able to pressurize at a squat or be able to pressurize when legs are straighter.
Okay.
That's really the best way you can probably put it is, am I gifted at tons of pressure when my legs are in a straighter position, which is why I would go to straighter legs. Like, we've all seen athletes who do cleans and just straighten their legs right away. Probably that's where they want to go to where they have pressure, even if it's faulty for the
It's
movement.
just like a natural consequence of like physical constraint that they have to go around it, and then they rely more on that part because they feel like they're more natural to it. No, it does make sense. So yeah, it's good. Going on, I would like to ask a question about this topic. So the difference between elastic and muscular athlete. When you have like more muscular athletes, so you tend to change, not change, but you tend to make them do more elastic kind of exercises, or you just go with it because you say, oh, this guy belongs to this area, so it doesn't, it will never utilize that elastic component. So I just go for the muscular one and try to make him as strong as possible because I always know they will use it and not use the elastic part.
Yeah, that's a good question. And when I wrote my book Vertical Foundations in, I think, 2014, I probably had no idea what I was actually. I had the elastic and the power, jumper, but I think I don't even know what I wrote about training. I honestly probably need to change it. I could look at it and maybe it's good, but at the end of the day, what you need to do is I just look at it like you have your time period where you're going to work on weaknesses. And then, but once you want to be good, it's all strengths. So, and even the weakness building can't set you back. So, for example, training in narrow ISA elastic. We all know they usually need to get stronger, right? Like, but for them, especially a narrow getting more barbell strength, like I think back squat, deep back squat max, they're going to have to change their shape to really be good at deep back squatting, meaning they're going to have to crank more anterior tilt. They're going to have to arch their back. They're going to have to impinge their spine for the most part. It's just not, it's going to be a totally different strategy, and it's going to actually shape change them in probably a not so good way. So whatever you do with them, and I'm not saying you can't back squat a narrow, you can. You just have to be careful. And I'll say this too, is I think that narrow, Dan John, who's legendary strength coach here from the States, had said it well a long time ago on my podcast, is he said, if you're not built to squat, you shouldn't be doing under like a 10 RM. So basically, if you're not built to squat, and Angus would agree, we agreed with this, is basically if you're not built to squat, just don't squat heavy, because it's almost better to squat lighter and rep it out a little bit, because then it's not a heavy enough load to like change your shape, if that makes sense. It's the heavy loads where the narrow is going to really tilt their body in ways that don't work very well for them. So, but all this being said, if you want to emphasize strength for an elastic, because that's their weakness, you can do it. Just make sure it's not like negatively impacting their reactivity, their stride length, their range of motion. So be doing some of these tests as you go to just make sure that you're not digging yourself a hole. And the problem is a lot of coaches will do something based off an ideal. And I'm like, it takes one to know one. I mean, I've been the king of ideals. Sometimes thinking slow and grounded and practically is something that I have to work intentionally on. But I'll see the ideal of, oh, well, we're just strength training now in the off season and it'll pay off later. Well, not if you change the athlete's shape and general pressure strategy and completely like made them a different person. And now they have to like fight their way back. And it just doesn't work that way to me. Same thing with, let's say we have a wide and the wide doing like a lot of intense plyometrics with the wide. I've seen this happen. I trained a gold medalist as a strength coach. So it's like I'm a small part of that ship going forward. But when he would do too much fast stuff in the weight room or plyometrics, his nervous system would like just burn out and he couldn't tolerate it because wides, if I'm giving a wide their weakness, a muscle driven their weakness, which is elastic, a lot of times their elastic system isn't really super well developed. And so if I'm giving them too much joint pounding from all that elastic work, that's going to put their body in threat. They're not going to like it, and their lifts might even go down. In my book, Speed Strength, I highlighted this study. It's one of my favorites. There was two groups that did 12 weeks, I think, of training, maybe 16, like 8 weeks and 8 weeks. And the first 8 weeks, they had basically the first 8 weeks, I think they did, what was it, like 80% and up, 1 rep max lifting. The second 8 weeks, they did 60 to 80%, so more speed lifts. And what traditional training methodology would tell you would be, well, that's the way to go because you're going heavy to fast, so everybody should get better. That's not what happened. What happened is half of the athletes had their peak RFD, or rate of force development, during that heavy period. And when they went to the light period, RFD, or rate of force development, actually got worse for a lot of them. On the other hand, there was a flip-flop in another group where when they were doing the heavy, then they got worse, and then they did the light and got better. So if I had to guess, I would say the people who got better during the heavy were the wides, and the people who got better during the fast was the narrows. And I would be willing to bet that's the case. I'd be really interested to see that, but that's just how we respond. So if I'm training a bunch of people who respond best to light stuff, I just want to be really careful with how much I give them when we're working weaknesses. So for the wides, when we're doing weakness stuff, to me, actually, a lot of that is like extreme slows and iso holds, where I'm trying to like push range of motion, because a lot of times wides are actually very compressed and they have a hard time elongating. And so we'll do that as well. And then and then you would just start all the low level stuff, the low level hops, the low level bounds, start at the foot, work the intrinsic foot muscles, and then slowly build out from there. And just try to make sure, constantly be testing some of their main markers and make sure you're not blowing the circuits and stuff like that. So start with weaknesses, but within reason. And when they need to be good, you just need to focus on strengths.
Perfect. Thank you very much, sir. I'll go with the third question, Ricky.
Do we have
a little bit more time?
Yeah, we're good for now. I could do, let's see. Yeah, we can cover, I think we can cover the last two. We're good.
Okay. So the fourth question will be in regards of internal rotation. So my question is, internal rotation, is it dangerous when jumping, when performing any kind of plyos or even sprinting? Because I remember I saw a presentation of yours and the one even of Chris Corfis about, he was talking more about sprinting and how the internal rotation can help you out to produce more force and therefore to prepare yourself a little bit more forward. And yes, so if you could explain a little bit if this, dynamic valgus is a bad thing, or we shouldn't just focus too much on the thing of pushing out those knees.
Yeah, so that's a really good one. And just like the plyometrics, like just feeling the vertical, feeling the horizontal, it is something that I think a coach has to develop an eye for. Meaning, well, we'll start with this. The triangle as itself as a structure is an incredibly strong structure, and athletes will take advantage of that in sport. So if they're doing hurdle hops, if they're shooting a jump shot, it's going to happen. The knees have to come in a little bit. And even you could say it could be a relative knees in too, because someone who's kind of bow-legged, their knees have to come in too, but they might just come in to the point where they're now in neutral. So that's going to be a big factor too, because like for me personally, like I am very internally rotated just standing here. So my knees, my max internal rotation would be my knees hitting each other and then going even further. And you would see that when someone like myself would do a plyometric. On the other hand, and I posted this on my Instagram channel a while ago, but it was a guy doing like 60-inch hurdle hops. And
yeah, sorry, that's why
so he's already external, and so his internal rotation is going to be basically knees basically just facing you. So that you have to understand that that's different for everybody. But what you do need to look at is two things: is one, it's the foot, and then the timing. So with the foot, we want to make sure if an athlete generally has feet that tend to, I would just say, overpronate, that collapse excessively, that's going to lend to a speed of internal rotation that's faster than what you want. So, I mean, in reality, it's all about the timing. It's not about did the knees get there. It's about how fast did they get there, and did they get there that coincided with the peak pronation in the jump. So meaning when we pronate in the jump, or when we have the knees come in to help that elastic transfer to compress and then expand, the feet will flatten, the tibia will internally rotate, the femur will internally rotate a little faster. Okay, so there's this cascade. But really what you just want to see is when the feet are at their peak, the knees should be at their peak in. So when the feet have maximally flattened or heels everted out to the side, the knees should be about their max. And that's just the dead bottom of a jump for the most part. The problem is someone who, when they're starting to reverse it, the knees are still coming in, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So like or maybe the knees, I don't know of a situation, I guess this could happen, but the knees came in so fast, and then you started to reverse it before you lift it off, but I don't think that would happen. I don't actually know if that physically could happen. What you would see though is the knees, the athlete's trying to reverse it, they're trying to extend the hips, and the knees are still having that travel, and then the feet oftentimes might end up real far out to the sides or something like that. So it's more the timing, and then you'll also see like bilateral timing issues sometimes too. One knee stays in longer than the other, something like that. So, but the thing is you have to be pretty skilled to notice that. I've had discussions on that. I was writing a couple knees in articles like 3 years ago, and I was talking to like friends who do this stuff and consult with physical therapists in that Bill Hartman train of thought on this, and they were showing me pictures and videos and slides, and I was like, I think I get it. It's like it really was something I had to have me walk through, but I think watching enough jumps and just noticing that rhythm of knees out to in, and just start paying attention to it. And if you watch enough athletes, you start to notice when the rhythm is too fast, like the rotation is too fast. And you could say too that where you're not in control of it, like you aren't having that pressurized return where everything's snapping hard the other way. You know what I'm saying? It's like for every action, there's a reaction. So there should be an ease in, but there should be an equal everything going the other way. And if you don't have an equal everything going the other way, pressure was not managed, and the force has got to go somewhere. So it could be the knee, or the lower leg, or something like that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Because this I mean, I imagine even for you that in the past they always say, push your knees out, but without any kind of consciousness thinking behind it, it's like just push it out, and then maybe it's good, maybe it's not. So this is I saw your post. I have to be honest. I saw it, and I was thrilled about it because it was something that it might be a game changer if you think that maybe this a little bit the internal rotation, and then the absolute consequence, sorry, I don't know the words, but consequence external rotation is crucial for generate more power, and therefore to have like as you said, like a faster and a more important snap in that sense, and then the athlete can actually jump higher. So yes, thank you, sir. It was really good. Moving on at this point, so we just said that basically this internal rotation must arrive before, in the sense that there is a limit in the internal rotation and must be the same as the external rotation, right? So it might happen even when an athlete is sprinting, because there's kind of like, what do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually a place that's almost better to look at that sometimes, and you'll tend to see the same trend show up to a degree. In sprinting, everything's just tighter and faster. So in jumping, you have a longer contact time, so that means you're going to have more knees in, relatively speaking. You're going to have a bigger magnitudes of things happening. In jumping, sprinting, everything's coming at you faster. And so what you'll tend to see is when you see you will see knees in sprinting, but you're going to see it at the peak of the knee swing in the front of the athlete. So when the athlete's knee is at the highest position on the front side of the body, you'll generally see some degree of internal rotation there. Some athletes, maybe not a lot. There was a female, and this is where it does get interesting, is because you actually don't want too much. You could have more in jumping. If you have too much in sprinting, you probably have too long of a stride length, to be honest. or your stride frequency isn't good enough. And it was a female, Abby Steiner. She, junior at University of Kentucky, ran the indoor NCAA record in the 200-meter dash, and not a great starter, but once she gets up and running, she's incredible. And if you watch her compared to the girls next to her, she doesn't have nearly the internal rotation at the top of the stride, but she also has a really unique stride pattern with a little higher frequency where she has like this asymmetrical spiraling action that I guarantee no one coached her to do. And asymmetry generates momentum. But if you watch something like that, watch her from the front, you'll see significantly less travel. But I mean, generally you're going to have a little bit. So it's a spectrum, but you would have less than jumping.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Ricky, vado io, vai tu?
Ultima.
So let's handle the last question, the fifth question, because I already saw, as I said before, I was looking a lot at your Instagram page and your website, and the last thing that I would like to ask you is that I saw this really good post and got me thinking, like, probably we were always wrong, or I was always wrong. Are two legs jumps really on two legs, or it's just one big leg, just one leg that produced the actual jump, and the other one is just, I don't know how to say, it's just the cliff. I don't know how to say in English.
I know what you're saying. Yes, so that's a good. I mean, I would say it's for the most part it's a one leg jump. And it's really interesting to see, I think in the last 10 years, and outside of volleyball at least, you watch like the professional dunkers, it's really gotten to a very largely the guys off two legs are the guys getting up the highest. I don't think it would have been like that 20 years ago, for the most part, at least from what I've seen. And so it's almost like the skill of two leg jumping has just improved as a whole on some level. And what you see in some of those guys who really, really are getting up off two legs is, and this fits with the asymmetry. I was mentioning the asymmetrical sprinting is one side of the body gives and the other takes, or one part of the body compresses and the other part expands. So every movement we do, one side is compressing, one side is expanding. And so, except for, I guess, a standing vertical jump, anything but that's not really like sport as much. It's, we always are moving, and we're always, or you could think of a pitcher throwing a baseball or a football or whatever, or handball, probably handball more popular over there, but like you have one arm is drawing close to the body and is creating compression, and then the hand that's throwing is expanding towards the target. So this being said, when you are doing a two leg vertical jump, you're not the second to last leg that's kind of pushing is the compressing leg. So that's compressing everything into the expanding plant leg. And that expanding plant leg, part of the expansion means I'm rigid and I don't like to be compressed. So think about, we want that rigid last step, right? So it's almost a compression going into expansion. And when you watch some of these really good athletes, you'll actually see that last plant leg, it actually will internally rotate a little bit to put itself in this more advantageous position to be a lever. And so a pretty rigid one. And I know in volleyball, you see that big time. You'll see people internally rotate that foot till it's parallel to the net. Like, I mean, they are really blocking off. They are hard blocking off all that speed. And so, I mean, that's where I think most of the force goes. Everything with the foot that's coming down second to last is really just helping to shuttle speed onto that last foot without losing it, and it probably gives you a little push. But even what you see in that second to last foot is you watch the foot come down and you see the heel come up as the knee is coming forward. Like it's a speed lever throwing speed into the stiff leg, if that makes sense. And so if you were to see that heel not come up very fast, maybe then it would be a true kind of slower, both legs pushing equally type setup. But I don't know, maybe it's 70-30 in terms of what's actually getting projected, but it's just about not slowing down. It's running two leg jumps are just about not slowing down and using compression and expansion effectively.
Perfect. So basically, I don't know how to, I'm missing the words in English, but yes. So you got like the last step, you stiff on the ground, and then you generate some sort of lever that push you up. Like right? Is that what kind of makes sense? And then the last leg is like swinging and just contribute a little bit less in the outcome of the jump.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, either whether it's a one-leg jump or a two-leg jump, you generally want a leg that it will deform. Like it's not an iron rod. It has to deform a little bit, but generally the less that it does deform, the better lever it's going to be. So it's I think that's, and if it does deform a lot, then you have to use more muscle.
Yeah.
To be
So
able
we're
to,
coming back to the beginning of the podcast.